sorry I almost missed your call. Just getting about ready. The Uber should be here soon.
That's all good. Just letting you know that we got to Denny's and we'll be waiting for you there.
Perfect. Oh, shoot. You don't mind if we record this conversation, do you?
I guess? Why though?
It's just that I have been anticipating this movie for the past 3 years, ever since Tom Hooper was brought down as a director. And I knew I had to see this movie opening night. One, because there is no way that this movie is not going to be a train wreck. And two, I don't know if we're ever going to see a movie like this again in theaters, you know?
No.
And now the day is finally here. You don't think I'm building up this movie too much, do you? Like, I don't want to overhype it or anything and build up that expectation.
I don't know, man. From what all we've heard and looking at the reviews so far, I think we're in for a very special treat.
Oh, yes. Maybe if we're lucky next year, we can get, like, rowdy screenings of this movie with, like, people in costume and doing all types of things.
Yes. With people meowing at the screen, or, like, people can be shouting milk, like Jason Derulo does in the trailers.
Oh my god, that would be amazing. I can't wait. Oh, shoot. The Uber's here. I gotta go. I'll see you at the Denny's.
See ya.
Bye. So, just as a full disclosure, this is attempt number 3 at attempting to make a video about this movie. Back in December, I tried my hand at making a vlog reaction to this movie, but I found that I had very little original to say about this subject. And most of my thoughts had very little differentiation from the general consensus on Twitter, and I thought I had very little to add to the discussion, which was only more compounded when people like Lindsay Ellis and Maggie Mae Fish started to make their own videos about the subject. And for a while, I left it at that. Cats 2019 was a bad movie based on an okay musical that didn't work very well outside of the setting of a stage show. Though as these past months have weighed on, I find myself thinking on this movie experience, contemplating if we will ever see something like this again. And even a year away from this film, we have seen the world dramatically change in ways that no one could have predicted. And through all these trials and tribulations, I find myself contemplating this movie as if I am still called to think on it, to obsess over it, to try to understand it. And now that we live in a world where the novelty and shock of this movie has worn off, I wish to focus less on the absurdity of this film and the stage show, and rather try to understand the decisions that resulted in this masterpiece, particularly those made by the directors and the producers. After all, Tom Hooper himself believes that, quote, "The hardest thing about directing is choosing. You choose a project, you live with it for 2 years, and from the DNA of those choices, everything flows. And if there is something wrong with that choice, well, then you're in trouble." So about those choices, Tom.
At the center of this incredibly entertaining, comedic, fantastical musical is a very timely story about the importance of inclusion and redemption.
When people think of auteur directors, a couple of names pop up. Hitchcock, Kubrick, Tarantino, Coppola, Nolan, and while his name is rarely seen amongst these esteemed artists, Tom Hooper fits well with these fellow master auteurs of cinema. Fundamentally, auteurs are seen as the sole creative force of the film, where the director is able to apply their distinct vision for the film onto the story, and are believed to be the source of some sort of cinematic truth. From his very first film, Painted Faces, Hooper has often spoken about capturing a sense of authenticity within his films. And like most auteurs, he would use his position of power and authority to bring about that authenticity. Oftentimes, most of Hooper's filmmaking choices are focused on highlighting elements of an actor's performance in order to evoke some sense of realism. Utilizing extreme close-ups, framing the actors in isolation, relying on handheld and tracking shots, and desaturated color palettes are all utilized, as Hooper believes that this helps to emphasize what he deems most important, the actors' individual performances. During his time filming Les Mis, he reflected how, quote, "the placement of the camera was below that of the performance. In other words, the primary thing became how to protect that performance. I put the cameras where they had to be to make it possible, rather than the other way around."
And for that authenticity, Hooper was rewarded through accolades and financial success, his brave vision being seen as revolutionary, bold, and a breath of fresh air within the Academy.
Enough choices, artistry,
Anyway, to give Hooper some credit, many of his projects do lend themselves to this approach. His films like The King's Speech, The Danish Girl, The Damned United, as well as Hooper's television work, often involve small casts, intimate shooting locations, and a relatively grounded story that they're telling, usually about the characters' everyday struggles. And you would think that this would have resulted in a disaster the first time that Hooper tried to make a musical with Les Mis. But something that distinguishes this show from other stage shows to adapt is that it places a larger importance on big emotional musical numbers, often stationary with very little choreography, which would allow actors to give that sweet, authentic performance that Hooper loves to get.
And in these attempts to capture this authenticity, he compromises qualities of the story and music for this authenticity to work. Filming your actors close up, forcing them to sing on set for 15 takes up to the point of compromising their voices, and rarely cutting to any wide shots, makes this story feel very isolated within its framing. And while many were able to praise elements of this film due to elements borrowed from the stage production, There is a reason why most people ignore this film outside of Anne Hathaway's performance and people making fun of Russell Crowe. And even if this film displayed many of the shortcomings to Hooper's ability as a director, the critical praise for Les Mis was enough to make Hooper an esteemed member of the Motion Pictures Academy, a true auteur whose authenticity and vision doesn't just result in Oscar gold, but major earnings at the box office, a killer combination for someone like Hooper.
So, when Universal decided that it was time to shoot for that same success 4 years later, it would make sense that Hooper would be the first choice when it came time to resurrect Andrew Lloyd Webber's classical musical from development hell. After all, these were both long-running musicals that were known for having a big emotional musical number about a woman crying about a formerly happy time in her life. So, in the hands of an auteur like Hooper, surely we would have a film destined for that same success. Right? There is already much that has been said about the film Cats itself. The ways it turned Macavity into a slasher villain to provide some semblance of a linear plot, the unnecessary focus on celebrity characters like Jenny Anydots and Bustopher Jones, the ways that Grisabella just always has snot on her nose. Just like, right there. You could just as well as the way that this movie always sits at Marianas Trench levels of the Uncanny Valley. And don't get me wrong, there is so much that is worth examining and mocking with this movie, but many of these reviews and retrospectives seem to ignore just some of the baffling directing decisions that were made on part of Hooper.
Making its return from Les Mis is Hooper's insistence on making the actors sing live on set for multiple takes. This was one of the most mocked elements of the film, as it compromised many elements of the actors' performances and forced them to place their cameras in awkward positions to hide the audio equipment necessary for this gimmick, resulting in the actors awkwardly shuffling around on the set while constantly sounding out of breath. Both Cats and Les Mis had a lot of extremely talented singers working on the cast, some who have very little formal singing training working their tails off to achieve a solid performance. And when you have a director that insists upon filming multiple takes of the same song with the same intense emotions, these performers are going to be a lot more hindered than they would be if they had performed it once for a night like a stage actor, or once in an audio dub for the scene. Though where Cats drowned where Les Mis was able to stay afloat comes with the choreography. Say what you will about Les Mis as a show, most of the spectacle came from hearing these powerful emotional ballads live on stage. And because of this, much of the staging is allowed to be stationary and static to better facilitate the vocal performances, which would make it somewhat easier if someone like Hooper wanted you to sing the same song 20 times in a row at the same intensity. But Cats as a musical only really has one song that would have matched that same operatic style, and every other musical number is primarily dance-focused. As a result, you have so many scenes where the actors are constantly sounding out of breath, and it sounds as if everyone is desperately gasping for air throughout these takes. Now, having weaker vocal performances than the stage show is basically the standard within film adaptations of most musicals. Aside from that one song, most people who enjoy the musical enjoy it for the choreography, where the appeal of the show is more akin to Cirque du Soleil rather than any other stage productions. And half of the spectacle is seeing these performers achieve these different feats of choreography and acrobatics. In credit to the stage show, there are some killer dance numbers in the show, and with each revival, they have attempted to integrate numerous dance styles in the show, from ballet to tap to hip-hop. It is telling that of all of the elements of this film that are working against it, the consensus still is that all of the dances were decently performed and the only unironically good part of the film, which I believe is a testament to all of the immensely talented dancers who were brought onto the film. In what was probably the best decision made, the folks at Universal brought Andy Bleckenbauer as the head choreographer, who didn't just do the choreography for In the Heights and Hamilton, but also did work for the 2016 revival of the Broadway production. In addition to this critically beloved choreographer, They brought on so many immensely talented dancers, from ballet masters like Francesca Hayward and Robbie Fairchild and Stephen McCree, acclaimed hip-hop dancers like the dance duo Laurent and Larry Bourgeois, to the many veterans of the original stage production that were brought on to bring a healthy variety of dance styles to this production. You want to know how much some of this choreography slaps? I unironically think that this movie could have used more Jason Derulo, because of all of the celebrity A-list actors that they brought onto this mess. This is someone who actually has some decent dancing experience and genuinely believed in this project to the point of being still one of the only people who hasn't written off this entire endeavor. Doesn't excuse the weird accent he was going for, but points for effort. And honestly, most Broadway fans can be exceptionally forgiving of a show if it does a decent enough job showcasing some of its songs and choreography, to the point where they can be a little bit too forgiving if you ask me, but I digress. So, if you were able to showcase some of these great dancers in your dance-centric musical, you might not have a box office smash, but you probably wouldn't have had the same type of a disaster that we got.
But it is here where Hooper's insistence on bringing about his vision of authenticity actively undermines the potentially positive qualities of this movie. And for these, we can't place all of the blame solely on Hooper's shoulders.
For this film, Tom Hooper and Universal brought on Christopher Ross as the director of photography, and frequent collaborator Melanie Oliver returned as the head editor. Aside from Melanie's role as editor for Les Mis and Judy, both crew members share very little experience working with films with strong musical elements. And even in the case of Oliver, Les Mis and Judy are far less choreography-intensive stories, and likewise do not have the same palette when it comes to presenting these same types of stories. Let me explain. When it comes to cinematography and film editing, different DPs and editors develop styles with experience. Like painters in a color palette, DPs will figure out what shots to use with certain scenes to emphasize the visual elements they consider most important. How they frame certain shots, how certain scenes are blocked, and how they light their actors can help to emphasize the mood and tone of a work, as a scene primarily composed of stationary shots will feel much different from one composed of tracking shots. From these choices, they provide the film's editor a library of footage that is to be crafted into a complete cut of the film. And knowing which footage to use at what time for what length is what can help determine how a scene progresses and how the audience can interpret it. And the more a DP and editor work with a certain type of film, the more they will gravitate towards certain instincts that might run counter to the needs of a movie. When you look at some of the most acclaimed dance numbers put to film, the DPs will consistently film scenes at full or wide shots that frame the actor's entire body. Rarely will these scenes put anything smaller than a medium shot. This is often done to help make sure that the audience can understand and appreciate the elaborate steps that the actor spent all this time learning, and we, the audience, get to appreciate the skill and practice that it took to get them to remember all of these steps. Now, like every film practice, there are going to be exceptions to this, but if you want to help emphasize the actor's dancing ability, you generally want to make these shots wider the more elaborate the choreography becomes, and only move in close when you want to emphasize the emotional state of the characters in those moments. Likewise, when this footage finally gets to the editor, the length of these shots should match the tone and pace of the songs and dance. Generally, you want a shot's length to match the section of the choreography, and moving to a different type of shot when you have a different set of choreography. This is so that we can get a consistent continuity within the dance routine. While this doesn't mean that one can't rapidly cut to different shots in a dance number, the editor should not stray away from the main focus of the dance, or else it might cause confusion to the overall scene and result in the dance being harder to follow. All of that said, when you look at the ways that Christopher Ross shot this film, a lot of these principles aren't taken into consideration as much as they should be. A majority of the shots in this film are handheld, whose shaky quality is often used to promote a sense of intimacy and authenticity with the characters. but it also puts the camera from the perspective of someone on the ground level of the story, which can bring about a sense of chaos and subjectivity to these events. Such shots are good if you want to try and make the audience feel like they are really there in a scene, but oftentimes, musical dance numbers take up the framing of something staged, where the camera's role is being made to feel more passive to match the audience's perspective of watching the dance. Oftentimes in these larger dance numbers in the movie, many of these handheld shots don't seem to serve much of a purpose that couldn't have already been easily swapped out for a stabilized shot. Now, even with these problems in mind, it could still be possible to make the dancing coherent in the editing stages of this film, so long as you have a level of consistency for who the main focus of the scene is supposed to be. Unfortunately, when it comes to a majority of the dance numbers, Melanie Oliver's editing comes off as unfocused and chaotic, as she rapidly cuts to a reaction shot of the dancing or a different angle of the same moves. This would not be so much of a problem if it corresponded to the music, but oftentimes, the cuts between shots occur between beats of the score, with an indistinguishable pattern to the different types of shots that are being cut to. The result is that these scenes feel a lot more chaotic and uneasy than they need to be. For one example, take this dance scene in the first 10 minutes of the film, where you have Munkustrap and Victoria doing a ballet. This is a famous scene in the stage show, and both of these actors are incredibly talented dancers who have performed similarly styled ballets on the stage. It might not look it, but these two are actually pulling off some pretty difficult choreography within these shots. Though you wouldn't know it, because in the span of this single minute of dance, there are 19 cuts, with some of these shots being as long as 10 seconds to as short as a quarter of a second. And this would be fine if the dance was meant to be a high energy or chaotic dance number. But the melody is slow and the movement is very controlled, making the energy of the edit not match the energy of the scene. And what makes this scene even more difficult to follow are the ways that each of these 19 shots for the scene are doing completely different things. Not only are they all handheld, but there is a lack of consistency of what the main focus of each shot is supposed to be. One moment there is a medium close-up shot reverse shot of Munkustrap and Victoria, then we are cutting to a high angle to eye level handheld shot and back to a wide angle shot. What was previously a straightforward and intimate scene between two characters is now made to feel clumsy and timid when it should feel confident and graceful.
I realize that these sort of technical problems are not going to be apparent to the average filmgoer, but these are the sort of issues that become a lot more prevalent when you place them in conjunction with the failures of the special effects, which is something that is a lot more harder to ignore.
I don't want to rag too much on the visuals of this movie, since that has already been a dead horse unto itself, but yeah, it's strange to see human hands fade in and out of these models. Yes, in some shots, the actors feel like they're floating above the ground. Yeah, some of the faces appear like they're being grafted onto these CGI bodies. But these are not indicative of a lack of skill on the part of the special effects artists, but they demonstrate a misguided art direction and a lack of time and budget being placed towards the effects artists working on this film. And both of these elements were actively hindered by Hooper's desire to not use conventional motion capture technology in the film. According to Hooper, he thought that the motion capture suits would be constraining to the performances being made by actors and would be detrimental to their dancing and singing. So instead of traditional motion capture, they utilized slightly different motion capture bands that utilized fewer trackers and essentially had the crew rotoscope fur, ears, and tails onto the actors. This digital fur technology that Hooper touted throughout the promotion of this film, to give some credit, was competently applied to these actors for a number of these shots, which is all the more impressive when you think about how difficult it must have been to apply these models frame by frame to these actors. Though as much as they talk about making these actors talk and move and look like cats with this technology, they never seem to take that final step when it comes to the faces, which is the biggest thing that was criticized in this film in the effects department. No matter how much effort they put into the bodies, the movement, into the fur of these cats, because Hooper filmed these actors so close up, it highlights just how much these cats look like they have human faces placed onto these creatures. And while they could have taken cues from the stage makeup to further emphasize the feline facial features, it is clear that this is not a step that Hooper and the other higher-level filmmakers would be willing to take, because things like facial trackers and digital makeup would not be an authentic presentation. And that's not even scratching the surface of how the effects artists were being treated in this production. By this time, most people have already heard about the rushed post-production schedule for the movie, where edits and effects were being made up until the day before the film's premiere 1 year ago. And this is in tandem with allegations of the special effects budget being cut after the trailer dropped and the negative press overwhelmed the coverage of the movie. As a result, the artists working on this movie were expected to work 80-hour work weeks to meet the deadline for this film. Such a prospect would be too much to handle for almost any studio, even one with as much experience as MPC's studio. These were underpaid workers who were being pushed to fulfill Hooper's vision for the visuals of the film, despite all of the obvious evidence on why it wouldn't work. And what kind of thanks do they get for doing their jobs in the conditions that were considered, quote, almost slavery? According to anonymous sources at MPC, individual emails from Tom Hooper himself belittling the quality of their work. Many sources within the production speak to Hooper's lack of knowledge about how animation works, often criticizing pre-rendered scenes for not looking completed, because they weren't, causing the artists to have to spend more time rendering scenes over and over again until Tom's vision was achieved. But nothing could ever be good enough for Hooper, where he would even demand changes being made to the movie after its theatrical release, forcing more work onto the effects artist up until MPC had to shut down their entire Toronto division. And even after all of that hard work, all of those days of people sleeping in the studios working under intensive crunch, and this is the thanks they get?
As cast members of the motion picture Cats,
nobody more than us understands the importance of good visual effects.
Because at the end of the day, even when they are the source of all of this misery, auteurs like Hooper can evade the brunt of this criticism. And much of this mockery falls upon the lower rung people who have to work at the most expendable levels.
Hooper has always had a lot of rumors surrounding the poor working conditions for lower-ranked crew members. From the ridiculous levels of soundproofing that needed to be done to do the on-set singing in Les Mis, the absurdly long workdays that would happen on set, and accounts like this from Robbie Fairchild. Quote, "It's an absolutely unnatural thing to do to your body. We had a physical therapist on set all the time. There was a day that I had to jump up, unassisted, onto the top of a gravestone, and by the end of the day, because we did it so many times, I couldn't feel my legs anymore. Our bodies just aren't made to do what cats do, but by God, we tried." And for context, Fairchild is a principal dancer for the New York City Ballet. This is a guy who has been dancing for most of his life and would likewise be expected to consistently dance at some of the most physically intensive choreography in the world for long periods in a production. So to get this guy to a state where he's in such physical pain either shows a cosmic level of negligence or a fundamental misunderstanding on how to properly manage a musical production.
It is decisions like these that lead me to believe that Hooper and the other higher-level crew members were not very comfortable with filming dancing versus other types of performances. The very few scenes where this movie actually gets to shine are the ensemble pieces that usually involve larger groups, because those are the few times where we actually get to see the full bodies of these performers actually doing well at their craft. Otherwise, we see Hooper engage with the same style we have seen in his other films. And like all true auteurs, he puts his style at the forefront of this process, even at the detriment of the other performers and other crew members. For auteurs like Hooper, actors and crew members are like dolls, perfectly primed and designed for his exact specifications, forced to immediately fit within his creative vision by mentally and physically bending them until they can get them into their exact vision of reality. Because you know it's real, man. Building giant sets is real. Having your actors sing on stage is real. Having the dancers take long classes to make them act like cats is real. Filming mostly handheld shots is real. Forcing your actors to perform the same stunt for a full day to the point of no longer being able to move their legs is real. Having your actors perform without motion capture suits is real. Forcing your FX team to work for 80 hours a week before the film's release is real. And making your actors cry to the point of snot always being on their nose is real. Who cares if the actors and artists are being pushed to the point of abuse? They're just standing in the way of making this vision real. Tom Hooper will not care who he hurts mentally, physically, and emotionally, because if he's going to do one thing, by God, he is going to make this goddamn movie real. And would you have it any other way? What kind of Doug Walker crap is this? Who the hell are you? The name of this cat is a difficult matter, not something distinct or unknown to thine. A figment of thought, a portent of madness? No, I'm the cat that is born of desire. Look, I know I give the vibe, but I'm not really that much of a furry, but I speak of no fetish nor appetite, for my charge is a matter of obsession. This is the desire for irony, to laugh and to mock and to call out the mire. For while you will prick and will scorn and will jeer, we both know where your heart resides. For no one would talk of this strange little movie unless you had yearned to see it once more. You talk of auteurs like a pestilence waiting, but we both know you have not full scorn. For if this whole film had a competent make it, would you even give it a chance on a storm? Because of these faults and these grave expectations, a brand new affection begins to take hold. Within these bad films forms a new type of icon, like Breen and Wood and Warren with some. So while you may prattle on trivial woes, from actors, technicians, and artists of fur, the full adoration begins to uphold, from rowdy screenings to self-aware memes. So let us dispense of these petty desires and begin the thing which Hooper deserves. Your praise, your praise, your praise, 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 praise. No. But do you not enjoy this film? Well, Can you honestly say that after 1 year, as the Jellicle ball begins to arrive once more, that you would wish that these mistakes not be made after all the joy that it bestows? My joy shouldn't come at the expense of an actor's well-being or a film crew's livelihood. But there is nothing like cats. There shall never be anything like cats. And you would wish to deny yourself this film's wonders and fun? Yeah, and you know why? Because Cats is a strange movie that defies understanding at times, but it will not be the last. Disastrous movies like this will always appear as long as we let auteurs like Hooper continue to exploit their actors and crew to capture some ridiculous vision by encouraging and rewarding these types of filmmakers. People talk about whether or not Hooper is going to be able to come back from this disaster, but filmmakers like him are always going to be able to rear their ugly heads in Hollywood as long as they have a vision, and if they are rich and white and straight. Never mind if those decisions are fundamentally at odds with the source material, never mind the ways that they condescend and misunderstand experts in an unfamiliar field, never mind if they push their actors to a mental and physical limit. These mediocre auteurs will be fine as long as we continue to reinforce this auteur-focused status quo by placing all of your faith in a singular, tortured artist. People like Tom Hooper are gonna be fine. But you know what? I will enjoy watching this train wreck until the end of time. But you can never get me to level a single praise to Hooper and other auteurs like him. I hope that all of them are discarded like the hacks that they are, so we can make way for people who use this medium to collaborate, experiment, and grow, and people who will actually listen to their cast and crew and treat them with respect. To people who take a stand against these abusive practices, work to elevate the voices of previously unheard perspectives, and ensure the safety and security of every performer and crew member that they work with. Because those are the people that make the art that will truly resonate with others and help to innovate. Not some lone genius who disregards everyone else for the sake of their vision. Now, get out of here, you stupid metaphor. Can you truly cast something so tied to you? We are the same souls, you and I know that deep down you share this same fear and desire. Not the fur, not the fur! Go! Get out of here, stupid cat! Go! Go! Alright! Jeez! But know that I am never truly going away. I know. And that is why we can't stop calling them out. But, for the moment, as the Jellicle Ball passes for the first year, I hope you will continue to speak out against those who use their power and status to force their ridiculous visions upon us, so that one day we may all have that Jellicle choice for ourselves. Thank you for watching. Best wishes.